All right. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to 4 Decades with Bomb Magazine. My name is Ted Dodson. I'm Bomb's Director of Circulation and one of our many contributing editors, and I'll be your host tonight. As you all know, Bomb is participating in the Print and Matter Virtual Art Book Fair. Please go check out our virtual table. We have an exclusive subscription offer just for the Art Book Fair, a 1-year print and digital subscription to our quarterly magazine, plus Bomb's new dad hat, which we have right here. It's very fetching, I think. Also, as always, check out our socials for more updates on upcoming events. We are at Bomb Magazine on Twitter and Facebook, at Bomb Mag on Instagram. And tonight is a very special night because it is the kickoff for our 40th anniversary celebration. Bomb has since 1981 been the gold standard for artist interviews. We started at the literal and figurative kitchen table of the downtown art scene in New York City, and we're instrumental in amplifying the work of a whole generation of artists and writers. Now, 40 years later, Bomb has expanded out of downtown. Our offices are in Brooklyn, and we work with artists and writers from around the world now. I think we still keep that ethos, though, that downtownness, where everyone is almost famous, everyone is working at the edge of what's possible, it's all new, and we love to talk about it. So tonight we'll be hearing from some of Bomb's most cherished contributors, talking about the magazine and their work in it. We'll be ending with a conversation between Bomb's intrepid founder and editor-in-chief, Betsy Sussler, and former Bomb senior editor, Mónica de la Torre. Betsy will also be taking questions after the conversation, so please go ahead and start entering those into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And I'll be back in a little while to introduce Betsy and Mónica, but until then, please enjoy 4 Decades with Bomb Magazine.
Twisted Intentions is a chapter from my first novel, Haunted Houses. London. I stare at the wallpaper in my hotel room. This wallpaper, were it in my apartment at home, would drive me crazy. But here it doesn't matter, like not being bothered by a city council election you couldn't vote in anyway. It passes right by and I'm unencumbered, clipping my toenails and placing the small hard pieces in the ashtray that reads Inverness Terrace. Small hard pieces of American toenails, Americana of a sort. Some people might burn them. Jessica's found a place to live in Ladbroke Grove and will leave the hotel, our home away from home, and her safe place from Charles. She once described their previous flat as having too many ghosts. A not unusual thing to say, except that she believes in ghosts the way she believes in angels. In fact, a ghost to her is an angel without a resting place. Today's Guardian has a paragraph on angels. The Vatican says they exist. Jessica isn't amused or surprised. Her small, sharp eyes, the eyes of a knitter, my mother would say, find their way into some secret part of me. She thinks that, and I'm beginning to believe her. Jessica also believes that no one should have any secrets, and that everyone knows all secrets already. To her, nothing is secret. Everything is sacred. Even in the midst of packing, readying herself for the move to her new home, Jessica's composed and remarkably calm. She thinks I'm always either worried or excited. When I worry, I know she's right about me, and now my excitement diminishes knowing that she can so easily see into my dialectical personality. I'm also lazy and paranoid, but she hasn't commented on this. I wonder why not. She's wrapping newspaper around her Buddhist altar and filling 2 large beaten-up suitcases with clothes. When she looks up at me, she says gossip is human, but unnecessary. From Jessica's point of view, if I can imagine it, and were she to draw her version of reality, all people would be connected not only spiritually, but materially and even physically. I concur that gossip is human simply because I do it, as do other people I know. But there must be other societies where gossip as such doesn't exist. Jessica says that while it makes sense to believe that, and that she believes differences exist among peoples, she would bet that everywhere, in even the tiniest bit of society in the farthest reaches of the world from here, one would find gossip.
Something that I appreciate about Bomb is the fact that like you could sort of be a portal where you kind of like have access to all these different cultural figures and, art, music, literature, poetry, and then you could sort of like bring all these conversations together.
I always believe in interdisciplinary approach to art and arts. So it always gives me sort of a comfort, I guess, to know that the reader who's reading this will read something about poetry or literature or music or film after mine, or has just read something about that.
No, I always find that interesting when there's that sort of cross, like a novelist and an artist could speak about many things, especially if they're interested in each other's genre or whatever, or like say like a filmmaker and an artist, or like, I always enjoy that. And I always feel like, I mean, 2 painters talking might be pretty boring. Because you might just end up talking about materials and
Technique.
Like just that kind of a thing. I remember one time I was at a gala with Alex Katz, like it was honoring Alex Katz, and I was sitting next to him at the gala, and me and him just were talking about like turpentine, and all these people were like coming up to him to talk to him, and he just didn't want to. He just wanted to talk about studio stuff.
Yeah. Being a curator also means you interview artists, but you just don't have a recorder, or sometimes artists, I guess, don't know they're being interviewed. But when I do a studio visit, it's again a conversation that could have easily been an interview. So I guess I always go to an artist studio, or in our reality, I always Zoom with artists in sort of in that manner. And when you interview one of those artists, it's quite different, as we just talked about. It's sort of more of a conversation that just happens to be recorded, or in the end turn into a text. And I think one element of, and I've been doing interviews for Bomb for a few years, and I think that's the one element of a Bomb interview that, in my experience, that when I do one, it's always, or maybe I always associate Bomb with poems and poetry, and I always try to find that element in the work.
There are 2 different types of art communities. I think there's your own like close artist community of like actual artists that you engage with all the time, you know, like studio visits, and you're sort of like aware of what each other is doing. And then there's now, you know, there's like a broader artist community where you might not like physically have studio visits or even know the person, but you're kind of like aware of each other somehow, and you're like in dialogue with each other's work. Or it's even more interesting is when, you know, something is just in the air, and, you know, my antenna could catch it, and some artist like, you know, in Germany or wherever, their antenna could catch it, and we could be kind of like tapping into the same sort of collective consciousness.
I remember in '81 that I saw the first issue of Bomb, and it left a huge impression on me because the cover was so fantastic, and it seemed to capture the simultaneous sort of dangerous element and the sort of thrill and fun of living downtown in New York at that point in time. And that cover just captured my imagination. And I thought the title was really great too, Bomb, because it sort of fell like a bomb in my, like, you know, little life at the age of 19. I moved to LA in 1988 to go to graduate school at Art Center, and one of my professors was Mike Kelly. And Mike, my very first term in school, had a little interview in Bomb that I remember reading. And it wasn't really a sort of penetrating interview or anything, but it was about being in LA and being an LA artist and what that might be like and how it compared to New York. And I was from New York and I had just moved, so I was just getting used to LA. And this article had a big impression on me, even though it wasn't long or very deep. It was really about what it means to be an LA artist and what the scene in LA was like at that time. And then there was another one, another article that I thought was actually really fantastic, and that was Mike's interview, with John Miller, another really good artist. And that was sort of eye-opening because Mike was talking about the pieces that were in his retrospective. So I think that was really insightful, and it caught that kind of special thing about Bomb, which is the artist's voice. And Mike's voice was so strong, and it was so important to me at that point in my life. It still is. I still hear it in my head. But to hear his voice, which was very special, come through the magazine was what I loved. I have, I don't know, a kind of personal relationship with Bomb because it was, you know, the periodical magazine that gave space for artists' voices, poets, fiction. I remember reading something fantastic by Lynne Tillman, for example, in Bomb, Kathy Acker, you know, so there's writers, there's musicians, there's poets, and there's artists, and everyone's getting to speak in their own voice. And, you know, the arts, a deep understanding of one art form can help you develop a deep understanding of another. So having poetry and fiction and music and art all together in one magazine it's a great thing, because I think that when you become an artist, you enter into culture in a very particular way, and that culture includes all of the arts. And I expect, or I want artists to be conversant in all of the arts. And I think, you know, Bomb really makes that happen.
None of us had any visibility above 14th Street or even above Canal Street, So and this was way before social media was even thought of, and I wish it hadn't been thought of, but anyway, it was a way to be out in public with our work, and it was a great opportunity because there was nothing else around for people like you or me or Kathy Acker or Lynne Tillman. I mean, there weren't people publishing our work or even looking at it. I don't know. It was thrilling when it came. It was thrilling to see. I mean, I got a lot of thrills from Bomb Magazine over the years because I published almost all of my first book in Bomb Magazine and all my first novel, I believe. Very sick. At that time, he was living on 23rd Street, near Fifth Avenue. And I mean, I had known him when he was living over in Great Jones Street, but, he'd moved into that loft there, and he was in terrible shape. But he liked to walk to, from where he was to this bar that was just before the Chelsea Hotel. He would never go into the Chelsea Hotel, and he said he never wanted to go in there again in his life. But he liked this place, which is called Zigzag. And so he did part of the interview in this loft, and then we walked down to this bar and, sat in the bar. I don't remember him having a drink, but I'm sure I did. And because I was drinking in those days. But it was kind of weird in a way. I mean, I didn't feel weird about the fact that he was sick. What I felt weird about was that I didn't know whether he wanted, to reveal that in an interview. Even though, okay, it's public knowledge among people like us, but, he hadn't made any sort of declaration of this situation. So I decided I would avoid that, and just talk about his work, because I had learned a lot from Robert. Robert taught me how to take photographs. Well, he didn't teach me how to take a photograph. He taught me how to light a photograph. And this was years before. I had gone to see him at his place on Great Jones, and he was Great Jones. And he showed me how to use gel so that it doesn't daze the subject with color, but just the outline. And he showed me all these tricks on how to take photos. So we talked about his work mostly. I mean, almost entirely about his work. Because, I never know how much of somebody's personal life they want to have in an interview. And I think, what difference does it make that he's died? I mean, if he doesn't want to talk about it, and he didn't indicate that he didn't, but I'm not into that kind of, I mean, I don't do interviews anymore anyway, but I don't like that thing of, revealing some secret. I think that actually Bomb, which we didn't think was going to last that long, really. I mean, but, you made it into something of lasting value. And I think it's because there wasn't anything like something, and there still isn't, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the thing that I so valued about it was that I could interview somebody like Tuesday at length about things that, conventional American publications would consider too arcane or too specialized or too intellectual, right? I mean, it sustained a sense of community with people that are pretty scattered, I mean, I feel like I'm in touch with people that, on some level, in touch with people's process, what people are thinking about, how they're thinking about it, and how they're doing it. Unfortunately, it applies today more than ever. But, you can't ever take for granted that all these, victories have been won. That we try and show the fascism. You can never take that for granted. It just doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
I've always really been into herbs as like a just sort of hobby, I guess, honestly. But I'm always researching like different herbs. I take a ton of herbs, and that kind of like those weird areas of study that artists have that we don't talk about publicly in connection with our work. That was sort of the inspiration to try to find a place to do that with my own work. Cloves, with their intoxicating, almost stinging aroma, some idyllic hybrid of cinnamon's thin catalyst and nutmeg's rich hallucinatory nodding. Cloves like the needle between two kinds of bittersweet, like an indulgent spike in the libido through the act of smelling, arousing the desire for desire itself, the hope for the will to crave. Maybe so alluring because part of our physiology is trapped in the subconscious, requires our antiseptic ability for healing. I'm hung up on kelp as untapped redemption, entranced by the way it hangs and welcomes an ecosystem into its shabby embrace. I'm wondering if this marine weed can teach us something we need to know about exile and return from exile. My favorite piece so far was a piece on microdosing and magic mushrooms and the new practice that's becoming popular of microdosing them. I think because it's the most stretched out and surprising direction it's taken so far. Herbs are something I knew it was grounded in, but mushrooms and getting to this topic wasn't expected. So it was like a discovery within research. As is true in most instances of potential collective healing through ritual, members of the African diaspora are the born ready masters of ceremony in the resurgent ritual of the microdose. We possess an entire aesthetic tradition based on insinuating ourselves and our origins while also implicating and mastering the vampiric culture that tries to deny our connection with ourselves. And we accomplish this using microdoses of sound and shape through movement, speech, and music. Yes, like it's something I feel like I can like give back that feels really tangible, even though that's kind of a corny way of putting it. I never wanted it to like move toward the didactic, so it was more like
because I had learned a lot from Robert.
Microdosing them. I think because it's the most stretched out and surprising direction it's taken so far. Herbs are something I knew it was grounded in, but mushrooms and getting to this topic wasn't expected. So it was like a discovery within research. As is true in most instances of potential collective healing through ritual, members of the African diaspora are the born ready masters of ceremony in the resurgent ritual of the microdose. We possess an entire aesthetic tradition based on insinuating ourselves and our origins while also implicating and mastering the vampiric culture that tries to deny our connection with ourselves. And we accomplish this using microdoses of sound and shape through movement, speech, and music. Yes, like it's something I feel like I can like give back that feels really tangible, even though that's kind of a corny way of putting it. I never wanted it to like move toward the didactic, so it was more like how I feel like the art world kind of the body is sort of exiled, especially at this stage where so much is happening in these boxes. And so yeah, it was just a way to maybe not be didactic, but to remind myself and readers like not to eliminate the body from our art practice or creative practice or whatever we're doing, you know? I guess just by trying to be as real as possible with how I engage with the plants, and also always in this series, like kind of intentionally mining that idea of who's entitled to talk about things that are good for us, because I think that comes up like racially and with gender and class, where specifically like a working class background means that you talk about functionality and utilitarian things, and you're not supposed to have the luxury of thinking about the garden and the plants, and just also, you know, it, remembering early on when I was like radicalized, reading and just kind of scorning, not nature poems, but the very like petty bourgeois, like micro attention to like what kind of butter you use and things like that, that ended up showing up in a lot of lyric poetry. And then this period, I guess, I'm sort of like circling back and reclaiming like the problem is not, you know, nature showing up in poetry and literature. The problem is who feels like that I was feeling like I wasn't allowed to, like as a Black woman writer who's, you know, has a certain like idea about what her political viewpoints are. Like, you're not allowed to like show that you give a shit about plants. So like trying to, I guess seeing MF Doom do that as a rapper, which is no one else has ever, you know, that's just not what's happening in rap. Yeah, so just, it's been nice to like try to reclaim like the ability to, you know, openly care about nature as a Black writer, basically. I think we're, anyone whose like body is politicized starts to feel like you constantly have to be reactionary to something that isn't the natural world. The first piece where I think my name was included anything in Bomb was the interview I did with Fareed Matuk on my book Hollywood Forever, which I think did shape a lot of, it was like the only in-depth interview I did about that book. And since that book was kind of rooted in intentional illegibility, I feel like Bomb helped make that more legible by having me discuss it there. So that was really great. And then just the experience, like Bomb does with a lot of writers, I think like giving permission to like write about herbs as a poet slash essayist slash other things. Like people don't really think that you can like bring all these things together. So it was like just having that hybrid voice, find a home, was really nice.
All right. Many thanks to Lynne Tillman, Ali Banasada, Usman Khan Yadabakan, Diana Thader, Gary Indiana, and Harmony Holiday. That was really amazing. Thank you all so much. Up next, we have a conversation between Bomb's founder and editor-in-chief, Betsy Sussler, and Mónica de la Torre. Mónica de la Torre is the author of 6 books of poems, of which the most recent is Repetition 19 from Nightboat Books. With Alex Balgue, she co-edited the anthology Women in Concrete Poetry, 1959 to 1979, just out from Primary Information, and teaches at Brooklyn College. She served as Bomb's senior editor from 2007 to 2016. Betsy Sussler co-founded Bomb 40 years ago and has been its editor-in-chief and publisher ever since. She has edited 5 compilations of Bomb interviews, most recently, Bomb the Author Interviews, published by Soho Press. Please, everyone, give a warm, warm welcome to Betsy and Mónica.
Hello.
Hi, Mónica.
Hi, Betsy. I can't see you.
I can't see me either. I just want to thank everyone, though. You all were so moving. Harmony, Diana, Osman, Ali, Lynn, Gary, thank you. So am I supposed to do this? Maybe I'm supposed to do. Here I am. Hi.
Hi. Okay. Hey, what
It's
a
good to
lovely.
see you. Mónica and I worked side by side for 8 or 9 years, and I missed her so much when she was gone. It was great working with a poet, I have to say. So, hi.
Hi, it was so great working with you. I can't believe it. First, I have to just congratulate you. 40 years.
I know, it's pretty unbelievable. You know, when we started Bomb, we didn't think it was going to last. We thought 4 or 5 issues, this magical, you know, creature would emerge and then it would go away and everyone would be fine with that. And look at it 40 years later. It's kind of shocking.
Yes, I think a lot of people might not know why you named the magazine Bomb. So I think.
All right, let me tell all the stories.
Yes.
Well, first of all, before I started Bomb, or before we started Bomb, I should say, because the community really started Bomb. It's always been a community magazine, and it always will be. And the community just keeps getting larger and larger, which is really exciting. But before Bomb was started, I was acting in my then husband, Lindsay Smith's plays. He was a theater director. And I was acting in them because we needed 2 paychecks. So he would always cast me, not because I was an actress. But I thought it would be a good way to understand dialogue. So I went along with it. Plus we needed the paychecks. So my favorite part of this wasn't acting on stage. It was in rehearsal, where we would be, Lindsay would start every rehearsal period with a reading of the play that we were doing. And we were not supposed to use any intonation. We were simply supposed to read the play out loud per character according to the punctuation. And we would do this over and over and over again. But in this process, we were absorbing the language. We were becoming the characters. We were listening to who and what and where we were in the playwright's world. And this had a huge effect on me, and it's influenced me my entire life. So when we started talking about this magazine that we wanted to start, and yes, it was me who said around a kitchen table for dinner, for breakfast, I don't know where, wouldn't it be great if we started a magazine where we talked about the work, the way we talk about it among ourselves. And I was really thinking of the rehearsal process, because after we would read this play, we would discuss it, what we felt about it, where we wanted to take it, what we wanted to do. And these conversations were happening all over Soho, Tribeca, Lower East Side, whatever, among musicians and visual artists and writers. And they were very, very different from what you would see in magazines, which were written by critics or art historians. They were very much about the process. And everyone thought this was a wonderful idea. And when I say everyone, I said, I think everyone in Lower Manhattan. And Gary, Indiana's right, everyone below 14th Street, or maybe 23rd Street. So we talked about this idea, I swear, for like months, maybe a year, on street corners, at dinner parties, wherever, over in bars. And no one knew how to make a magazine, and no one knew what to call it. There were ideas like Blah Blah, which was ridiculous. Art and Culture, which was so boring, it put me to sleep before I even opened the damn thing. So finally I said, okay, we've got to decide on a name. Let's have a meeting. So a lot of the principals, Sarah Charlesworth, the visual artist, who had worked on Fox with Joseph Kossuth and many others, Glenn O'Brien, who was a managing editor of Interview for many years, myself, Michael McClard, a visual artist, who at the time was dating Liza Bear, who had started Avalanche. So we had some provenance, so to speak. I had started a magazine with Michael McClard and Eric Mitchell called X Magazine, which was theory and film. Lasted for 3 issues. But anyway, so we all got together. In the next room was Jamie Nares and Lindsay Smith, my then husband, who were talking about a theater project. And we started tossing out ideas. And Glenn, for some reason, started talking about Blast, which was the first artists and writers magazine of the 20th century. And it was started by Rebecca West, Wyndham Lewis, and Ezra Pound. And Michael, being an artist, was sitting there doodling, and he was making these beautiful little drawings of bombs. And I looked at Glenn and I looked at Michael. We didn't think this magazine was going to last, mind you. So it didn't matter really that I decided we were going to call it Bomb, because we wouldn't have to explain this to anyone, because it was just a small coterie of people. We'll get to that later. But anyway, I said, oh my God, Bomb, that's the name of the magazine. And everyone said, oh my God, that's the worst name. You can't call it Bomb. But Glenn got it. And Glenn said, I don't think it's a bad idea. That's how we started. And that's how it stuck. I won. I don't know. Well, I won because I said, I'm going to be editor-in-chief. No one can argue with me about this. Someone has to be responsible. And everyone said, okay, so I won.
Yes, and I mean, you're being incredibly generous by crediting the community, but it really was your idea. And then you planted the seed and everybody got excited. Are you okay? If I could, I would bring you some water.
Well, but everybody got excited enough to participate in it and make it happen.
Right.
I didn't do it by myself.
No, of course not. But it was your idea. And I'd never heard this about the doodles. And I mean, I've heard so much about why you named it Bomb, but I never heard this specific story, which is fascinating. I love it. So then what happens? Then you're like, okay, all right, we're going to start Bomb. And then
what happens is nobody knows how to design a magazine.
Right. And yes. And well, I mean, some of you did have experience editing, right? The respective.
Well, we had experience editing. We had experience writing. So anyway, Sarah and I meet at her studio to decide what the first cover is going to be. And I said, whether it's going to last or not, I want this to be a classic. So we all pretty much knew that the image for the cover was going to be Sarah's Charlesworth's lightning striking the Empire State Building. Oh, that's a cute poodle I see in the background. What a darling.
His name is Shadow. He'll come visit in a moment.
Oh, good. Okay, let's call him in. And there he is. So anyway, so Sarah and I sit down to discuss in her studio, not what the image is going to be, because we're sure of that, but the proportions of the magazine. And I said, it has to be a classic. We're sitting at her table and there's nothing on her table. Sarah was a minimalist at heart. So there were like 3 No. 2 pencils, sharp, and a bottle of Chanel No. 5. And I said, I want it to be in the proportion of the Golden Mean, because that's a classic. And the two of us sat there and went, what the hell is the proportion for the Golden Mean? We couldn't remember. And then I looked at the Chanel bottle and I said, Sarah, Chanel used it. I know it. We're going to do it in the proportion of the Chanel bottle from the top of the cap to the bottom, including the negative space. And that's going to be the Golden Mean. And we did, and it was.
Unbelievable. Of course, you couldn't look it up on the web.
So that was it. That was our proportion. And then a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting at a dinner party with my friend Mary Heilman, the painter, and she was dating this wonderful man, an author named Mark McGill, who at the time was a filmmaker. And I said, we're starting this incredible magazine. The only problem is we don't have a designer. And he said, I make a living as a graphic designer. I'll design it for you. So Mark McGill became our first designer for 10 issues.
Those are wonderful issues, by the way.
Yes,
they are. All of them.
Worked on them. Yeah.
So we have to compress 40 years in 16 more minutes, more or less.
Okay, what do you want to talk about?
So, well, I'm curious about like how could you say, I had another question, but let's start with this because we're talking about design. Is there a thing for each of the decades that like, what would be the words that you associate with every decade? So we get the 80s, downtown, interdisciplinary scene. A lot of organizations are there that are still around, Artist Space, The Kitchen, right? And these are really hubs for that community. Avalanche, of course. Art Forum is around, but that had been founded earlier. Maybe that's the one. It was Art Forum, the magazine that felt like it was becoming a
little more professional. And I think, but it's interesting, and I want to do a sidestep here. The other editors at BOM, Ben Samuels and Sabine Roos and Chantal and anyway, chose what they thought was the most iconic interview. I should say Chantal's last name, Chantal McStay, chose what they thought was the 80s most iconic interview. And that was the interview between Barbara Kruger and Richard Prince. And we've reproduced it in the next issue. And we'll do that in each issue for each decade. But we asked, and they complied very nicely and very graciously, Barbara and Richard, to annotate in their usual witty, funny selves, to annotate what they said back then. But what I realized about that interview is it is the most iconic interview of the 80s, because it's the first one that focused on a dialogue between two artists, which is what I had imagined Baum could be. And there it was.
Mhm.
And I went, wow, I didn't even know this was the interview, the iconic interview that sort of opened the way for all the future dialogue. So that was the 80s and the 90s. And when I say it became more professional, what do I mean by that? We, the community itself, had become more known and more recognized.
Mhm.
So people were, the interviews were more in depth. They were as ambitious as they could be. And I mean ambitious in the best possible sense of the word. They wanted to be intellectual. They wanted to break norms. They wanted to, what I mean by that is I had learned how to edit, right? Because I learned as I went. So I understood intuitively how to edit, but as I did it over 10 years, I became better at it. And I could teach other people how to do it. So it was really about what I called the Hans Hofmann push and pull. Some things were pushed back and some things were pulled forward. And that notion of listening, which I did in rehearsal, also became an innate part of editing. You listened really, really carefully to the audio and the transcript and to what was really being said and what could be developed. And I think all of those things really came to the fore in the 90s, so that we did extraordinary interviews in the 80s that were really off the cuff and punkish and raw and fabulous. But in the 90s, we perfected the Baum editorial method. And that to me was pretty important. Oh, here he is. See, there he goes.
He's making himself heard.
Announce that this is my cat's, Caleb's 19th birthday today at exactly 6:30 p.m. I don't think I'm going to find him to show him, but anyway, it's a very big day in my world.
Speaking of days, what was the precise date in which do you remember the day when you met with Sarah for the cover? No.
No, we did come out in May of 1981, and I remember taking it up to Gotham Book Mart, which was a big deal, bookstore for us back then. And we brought it up there for them to sell it, and they held it up like this. Like it was a filthy rag, and said, "Do you expect us to sell this?" And we went, "Yes, you don't understand." And to their credit, they did. I think they were the first bookstore to sell Baum.
In a way, we're also talking a little bit about technology, right? Because it was saddle stitched in the 80s, and then in the 90s, it was bound, right?
It was cut and paste. It was typeset, and then we would cut out the columns, and it was loaded with typos, mind you. It was obscene. But it was because I would come in and make all the corrections by taping over the correct words or the correct letters and Scotch tape them. And then Mark or Michael would come in and go, "I don't like that design." And they would rip up the paste and things would go flying everywhere, and they would redo it. It was part and parcel of, the process of making, which we all understand.
And the duration of it must have been really crazy, because we can't imagine what that was. Like production, how long did production take?
I don't remember. It's kind of like childbirth. It was hellish. And I don't remember.
Yeah, but thinking also about technology, I would think in the 90s, you don't have digital technology. I mean, I think this really informs also the way in which you would have to listen to your tapes. Like you really have to be listening and write transcribing at the same time, like you gain a proximity with the material that
Gain an intimacy with it. It is true, but I think we can still do that now. I have no trouble with that now. But at some point in the 90s, we started using computers. It was really cool.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, but he was
Stanley Moss was the designer.
Right. Yeah, then email changes everything, but we won't get to email yet. Okay, so do you have the iconic interview for the 90s yet? Have you chosen it?
No, we haven't chosen it yet, so I
What
can't
would you
say.
say? Would
But
you say?
maybe Susan Laurie Parks,
Mhm.
maybe Carrie James Marshall. I don't know, maybe Walter Mosley. I can't decide. I have to like make the list of what I think, and it will be like 50 interviews, and then the other editors will narrow it down to one.
Right. And I love
I
it.
have no favorites, I mean, I can't.
No, how could you possibly? I was thinking myself, do I have a favorite and something that stands out? I can't. No, I love them all.
Well, when you were at BOM, we were doing the Americas issues, and I would love for you to talk about that. Those were started with Daniel Flores, who's our contributing editor for Central American poetry, and it was right around the time when all the revolutions were happening in Nicaragua and El Salvador, and we really wanted to give a lot of pages to Mexico and Central America and South American artists because we knew too little about them. So one of the reasons I wanted to work with you is because you're Mexican American. So talk to me a little bit about the Americas issues.
Yes. So I remember when this is shocking to me, but in a year or two, it will have been 30 years since I moved to New York, which is crazy. I can't process that. But anyway, so I moved to New York, and the first thing I discovered was BOM magazine, for sure. Well, I met a few people at school, and then I discovered BOM magazine, and I was like, I love this. This is it. Like, I've made it to New York. This is my place. And then so a few years later, I think the first issue, was it the first issue with Francisco Toledo on the cover?
Possibly, because that was the first Americas issue with the little chihuahua.
Yes, exactly. With the Mexican hairless dog.
Yes. And then his son, who I didn't even know at the time was his son, was a subsequent cover.
Yes, Jerónimo, Dr. Lacra.
Yes.
Right. So those issues were phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Why? Because they were like a great opportunity to really spend time with it wasn't only the interview, it was like bringing a slice of that world over here. Like the issues had an integrity. I remember how you focused on certain regions, and just like if you looked at what the constellation of people that you were bringing into an issue, it was really an environment that you were translating, not just a person.
I agree, but can I say it's because the contributing editors were all artists and writers from those particular areas of those particular locations. So it wasn't top down. It was really going to the people in Buenos Aires or in Mexico City and saying, okay, I know you're a great artist. I know you're a great writer. Please tell me about the others. So Carmen Biosa does the first interview in the United States with Roberto Bolaño. I mean, it was unknown. Oscar Hayuelos, who was here, does an interview with Cabrera Infante, who has left Cuba and is in England. And that, by the way, was our first epistolary interview because they wanted to do it via fax, which they did. So it was our first written kind of back and forth questions and answers that came over the BOM fax machine. It was wonderful.
Right. Yes. But what you're saying is so important because, of course, who would know but the artists and the writers and the musicians who are there, they're all connected. So that was just phenomenal. And it opened the doors for so many translations. Roberto Bolaño, as you said, first interview to appear in BOM. And then you never imagined that you were covering, for you, it was like, oh, this writer who sounds really interesting. You're taking a leap of faith because you've never read the writing, right? So you're just like trusting your contributing editors. And then, whoa.
World famous, and we lose him on top of that. But yeah, But, you know, or like David Byrne and Arto Lindsay, you know, did so much work with Brazilian and South American musicians. And really, I mean, started that whole series in Balm. So everyone was very generous and very committed.
Absolutely.
That was
I think that for me would be that seems very much the tenor of the aughts, right? Like the late 90s and the 2000s, because it was also, it's a quarterly and you devoted one issue of the magazine to it. And I remember those took a long time. You couldn't just do an issue in the span of the production time that you would devote to another issue of the magazine. I mean,
No,
you would
the
be looking at it for
translation,
a
there was
year.
another level of writing in it because of the translations. And we had so many great translators working on that.
Yes. What else would you say about the aughts, the early 2000s?
Oh gosh, you know what? It's too close for me to comment on. Sorry. You know, I think this is what happened in the early 2000s. I began to understand that this was really something that could last for generations and generations. And so all I needed to do was get out of the way and let the next generations come in and do the work that we had started. And that is, you know, really talking about their creative process and letting it be about the artist's voice. So that's when I came to understand that it was such a much bigger project than anything I had started, that it had just mushroomed. And it was really exciting and really moving to see it. Just like I was watching tonight and going, wow, you know, look at this 3 generations later. How fabulous is this?
Well, that's your genius, Betsy. The reason why it's continuing.
That's our genius. Thank you very much.
That's true. That's true. But just letting
voice that's ever been involved.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Oh,
I'm going to ask you a few more questions and then we're going to open the floor.
okay.
The questions from the audience. But so one is, tell me, so we all can access the archive and read Balm's history through its marvelous interviews, which, by the way, I use all the time for teaching. They're incredible, incredible resource. Yeah, it's like, it's all there. It's all there. But what about what's not there? I want to hear maybe a story about something that didn't make it into an interview. Do you have any stories about things that you had to leave out?
Thank you, Mónica, because you know I wanted to talk about this. Many moons ago, I think in the 90s, Linda Jablonski did an interview with the great writer Luisa Valenzuela in Buenos Aires. And for one reason or another, this snippet didn't get into the final copy. Maybe Luisa didn't want it there. I can't remember. But it's a wonderful story. She was working on a short story and she could not figure out the ending. It was really annoying, as you can imagine. So she thought, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go into the park across from my apartment and I'm just going to like think and let it come to me. So she's sitting on a park bench and this man from the provinces, an indigenous man, I think, comes up to her and says, I really have to tell you something. And she said, I'm so sorry, but I am just trying to clear my mind. So please go away. And he did, but then he came back and she said the same thing or something similar. Finally, the 3rd time he comes back and he says, you don't understand. I really have to tell you this. And she said, okay, fine, tell me. He told her the ending to her story. Only in South America, right? Only in Latin America could this happen. He told her the ending to her story.
Incredible.
Isn't it? So I thought this is something that I can tell at dinner parties or to friends or to people I care about, or now to you all who are listening to this interview over the years as kind of our secret together. What a fabulous story.
Fabulous story. And why didn't it make it into the interview?
I don't know, it was ridiculous. Maybe someone felt self-conscious. Maybe we had so much to cover and there wasn't enough room, whatever. But I figured there were other ways to get the story out into the world.
Exactly. Well, this actually is a beautiful segue to my next and final question for me. And then we'll, again, as I said, we'll let the people, folks out there ask some questions. But what makes for a good conversation?
empathy, intelligence, courage, intimacy, and really the willingness to listen, really listen, and to respond to what someone is saying. And I think for most of our interviews, and I have loved this, the artists themselves who are being interviewed have had a revelation in the conversation. And that to me is the best possible thing that can happen, where you learn something about your work from the conversation that's been happening in BALM. And that's kind of what we aim for. It doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that explains a lot of like the way in which you pair subjects, right? It's not like it's never something completely predictable, because if it's predictable, then you know that
Work.
right. You need, it's really like having a dinner party or
Yeah.
you know, meeting people for coffee, and you go, what might happen if these two minds dialogue with each other and maybe get a little bit outside of their comfort zone so that they don't just repeat themselves. You know, you can tell when people just start going into PR mode or repeating something that they already know about, and then there are no surprises. So I know exactly what you're describing, and it's so palpable in the interviews when that.
I'm glad it is. I mean, we always ask the subject who they would most like to talk to. And we say, look, you have to be comfortable enough to be intimate, but you also have to be challenged. Those two things have to exist side by side, because without them, it's going to be boring. So those are the two things we go for. You know, and we broke a lot of journalistic molds. Like I said, it's fine for somebody who knows their work really well and who's intimate and who is friends with the subject to talk to them, because those are the people that are gonna get under the skin and understand a lot more. You know, so it's not journalism. It's something else.
What do you do? Okay, last question. What do you do when you love the subject, you love the people involved, somehow they get self-conscious?
We rewrite. You rewrite. It's I always treat the audio conversation as a script in development. I mean, I come from theater and I come from film, so the transcript is really a script in development. You rewrite it, you rewrite it, you rewrite it until you get it right. And what I mean by that is that the subject is given, you know, an edited, formed manuscript back with questions embedded in the text for them to answer. Would you clarify this? Do you think this is necessary? I cut this, but I'd really like to hear more about this. That kind of thing. So both the interviewer and the interviewee get a chance to do that in, you know, collaboration with an editor who's basically using the Socratic method of asking them questions.
Exactly.
Right. Because you know this because you did this for 8 or 9 years.
Yes.
And it's fun because everybody learns in the process, and it develops into something substantial and that's supposed to last.
Absolutely. And the listening, as you said earlier, is key to the person editing as well. The person editing has to be the best listener, right? I mean, as simple as it sounds, like, the editing is about encouraging them to just keep going, right? But not about, there's no normative style or like house style, or you need to sound this way to be embalmed. Like that is not
out the door. Out the door. No.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's speaking of doors, let's open the door. We have a first question here. Okay. And first audience question: how and why did BALM become a nonprofit?
Well, I thought, okay, it's an intellectual property. Is this really going to be able to make a lot of money? I really didn't think it would last for any amount of time unless it was a nonprofit. So we applied to New York State Council for the Arts under the auspices of Avalanche, which was also a nonprofit. And we got a $5,000 grant. It was amazing. I thought, oh my God, maybe we will last. $5,000 back then was a lot of money. But they said to me, we don't think as a nonprofit you should take advertising. And I said, wait a minute. If you think for 1 minute that we'll last without this, you're wrong. $5,000 isn't going to do it. So I was very clear from the beginning that we were going to be a nonprofit, but we were also a business.
And so that we would go after every twig and every branch, because if you tied all of those together, you would have a really strong log. And if you just had one log, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever, you'd probably sink. So that's always been my approach. And it's so far so good. I'm knocking on wood. I mean, oh my God, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Who knows? But yes, I intend for BOM to survive and thrive. And I think everybody else associated with it does too.
So far, you're doing great.
And so far, so good.
Yeah, so far, so good. So when did you break off from Avalanche?
Well, we were never a part of Avalanche, but Liza graciously and generously, Liza Bear was always our advisor, because she was the one who did know how to create a magazine. And so she was our advisor, I think, for the first 10 issues. And then, but when did we form our own nonprofit? Rosemary Carroll, who's still a board of trustees, and I worked on that. And in 1984, we became New Art Publications. Rosemary's a lawyer, so she set the whole thing up.
Yes. And did you choose that name, New Art Publications, just to avoid problems with the name BOM?
Yes. And because Avalanche was Center for New Art, so we wanted to, we didn't want, we just thought it was a natural progression, and it was easier to get a 501c3 with a name like that. But it was always DBA BOM Magazine.
I see. Right. Anybody else has questions out there? I'm going to tell you a story about the Americas issue.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I keep thinking about it because it's really funny. It's a translation issue. So when I started working there, the issue was focusing on Brazilian artists, and there was an interview with a filmmaker who I believe is based in Rio called Cal Guimarães. Cal Guimarães, and so I hadn't heard the transcript. I hadn't done anything. I was just tasked with finishing the edit on this interview and then seeing it through, right? And the word deviant kept coming up. And so it was like, so if you just allow yourself to deviate and become a deviant, and it was just like all these deviations and deviancy, and I was like, what is this about? Because he makes work while he walks. So he walks around the city, and his films have to do with walking, but not with deviancy. I was like, ooh, this sounds kinky. Is he like into, like sex stuff? And then I realized it was just a translation issue. That, yeah, there's a word in Portuguese and in Spanish that is divagar, which means to ramble without any particular destination.
To just wander. Oh my gosh, thank goodness you caught that. That would have been so embarrassing.
Well, it would have added a different dimension to it.
I'll say.
Yes. Okay, we have another question. Do you have any advice for a person starting a magazine today?
Oh boy, you know what? No. Let me tell you something. I think you have to have a great commitment. I don't think you should think too far in advance, because if you know how difficult it's going to be, you'd never do it. But if you're utterly and completely absorbed and committed and entranced with what you're doing, then keep going. You'll find a way.
Great advice. Great advice. Another one. Can you talk about the auctions and how that worked?
The auctions? You mean the art auctions?
Yes.
We have always felt that we belong to the artists whose voices we publish. And when it became glaringly apparent that we really were a nonprofit, and that if we didn't follow the formula of other nonprofits, we would not survive, we started asking artists who we had already published if they wouldn't support the magazine by donating artworks. And I would have to say that our publishers truly are the artists, because they came forward with such generosity and such support, and have been doing so for almost 40 years. And that's really one of the reasons we've survived.
Yeah. It's a nice model also of distribution amongst the arts, right?
Yeah, You know, I mean, if we were in Europe, we wouldn't have to do this because there would be huge government support. But that, as much as it exists, doesn't exist here to the extent that we need it to. So we have to rely on, as they call it, the private sector.
Indeed.
Our friends and contributors and patrons and board of trustees and individuals who are incredibly generous and who support the magazine because they believe in the mandate. And they want it to continue.
Yeah. I once heard Tom Finkelpearl say that that he actually sees the model as being a little more hybrid than that, because of course it's the government choosing not to collect their taxes that makes this model, the philanthropic model, possible. Yeah,
No
he was already working for the city. I was like, you're no longer at the museum, I can tell.
He's great, but no comment.
Absolutely. But yeah, it was like, oh, the government is actually supporting you by not collecting the rich people's taxes and allowing them to make a donation. We're not going to keep going there. Another question. How did you get the first issues out there, distribution? How did you start distributing the first issue?
There were in those days small distributors run by like-minded people who took BOM and helped. And I think we went around in a car and brought it to bookstores. I remember walking into bookstores and magazine shops and offering it. That's how we did it.
And what was the cut that people would take back then?
Oh gosh, you know, I don't remember. It's always huge. You know, the bookstore gets a percentage, the distributor gets a percentage, and then you get this little percentage. It's just the way it goes. It's fine. We never made money off of, even though we made sales, we never made money off of sales. That was just a kind of break-even situation. Subscriptions really are more to the point.
Another question. What do you see as the value of print-based material versus what's on the web?
Well, some people like to read print-based material. I do, for instance. The web is miraculous in that it's allowed this quarterly magazine to now have an audience of almost 1 million people. I mean, that's unheard of. It's also because we've digitized all of our content, allowed us to have this wonderful archive of 8,500 features. So, you know, there you go.
There you go. But there is something about seeing those heads. Yeah, no problem. Seeing things in context, that's just so exquisite.
Yeah.
In the context of paper.
Seeing an object.
Yes.
It's still fun to handle an object.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not a question, but someone named Rachel says, "Hi, Betsy. Thank you for the beautiful project. I have learned so much from the interviews and the conversations of minds. I also want to speak to your generous spirit. When Doug Michaels passed, you and I spoke, and I won't ever forget your kindness and beautiful spirit."
Oh, thank you. Oh, Doug, yes. He was part of Ant Farm. A wonderful collective that Hudson Marquez, who had been my boyfriend's in college's roommate or fraternity mate. Yes. Yeah, that's how I met him. Yes, and that was so sad. Anyway, Ant Farm, it was one of the most important collectives in the 70s. I don't know if you all know it.
Yeah, of course.
But a lot of architects and visual artists were a part of it.
When did it end, Ant Farm?
You know, I don't know. I don't know. Hudson would know, but where he is.
I see Ted. I don't know if that means
Yes,
something.
we're done.
I think that's about it.
Thank you, Mónica.
Thank you so much, Bets. We barely scratched the surface. I could stay here all night.
Well, I think y'all have to do this again. You know, we have a long 40th anniversary year ahead of us, and I'm sure we have plenty more in store. We should absolutely do this again. It was really a thrill. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us this evening, and a big thank you again to our participants, especially Betsy and Mónica. Y'all were fantastic. Just thank you so much. And please make sure to visit our Printed Matter Virtual Art Book Fair booth for a special subscription opportunity, and follow our socials for future event updates, recordings, announcements, and more. We are at Bomb Magazine on Facebook and Twitter, and at Bomb Mag on Instagram. I really hope everybody has a lovely rest of your evening. Take care.